It was a quiet morning in Ouagadougou, the kind of stillness that wraps a city before history shifts. The rising sun bathed the rooftops in gold, casting long shadows over the sleeping capital of Burkina Faso. Birds stirred lazily, the air crisp, unburdened. But on the upper balcony of the presidential residence, one man stood awake watching, listening. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Dressed in a simple dark military shirt, he held a porcelain cup of strong black coffee in one hand. His other hand rested lightly on the iron railing, fingertips brushing the cool metal. From this height, he could see far. The winding streets, the early vendors setting up their stalls, and the horizon beyond still cloaked in mist. To the outside world, it was just another morning. But for Traoré, something felt different. Not fear, not threat, just pressure. Like the atmosphere before a coming storm. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself, but years in uniform had taught him to trust his instincts. And today, those instincts whispered that something far beyond routine governance or military reports was approaching. He had risen early, as usual, reviewed intelligence briefs, scanned overnight communications. Everything seemed in order, but even the silence felt staged. Then came the first disruption. A buzz. Short, sharp. From inside the office, a red phone blinked, a line that rarely rang, one used only for high-priority international communications. Not press, not protocol, direct diplomacy. Only a handful of people in the world had access to it. Traoré didn't rush. He set down his coffee, stepped inside the office, and picked up the receiver. What he heard next was a voice he recognized instantly. Deep, deliberate, unmistakably Russian. "Captain Traoré," the voice said, "I hope I'm not disturbing your peace. This is Vladimir Putin." A pause followed. "I would like to invite you to Moscow." The words hung in the air, like a riddle. No context, no formalities. Just an invitation, and a subtle weight behind it. Traoré straightened. He didn't know it yet, but that simple sentence, on that quiet morning, would mark the beginning of a journey beyond anything the world had imagined. A journey not through distance, but through destiny itself. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his stance and listened. On the other end of the red line phone, Vladimir Putin's voice continued calm, precise, and personal. "I won't speak long on this line," Putin said, "but I will say this. The future of your region, and perhaps your nation, is being shaped in places far from your borders. I believe you already know that." Traoré didn't respond immediately. He was trained not to react to provocation, especially from global power players. But this wasn't provocation. It was something else, a signal, an offering, perhaps even a warning. Putin's voice softened slightly. "This is not a formal invitation, Captain. This is a direct request from one man to another. I want to speak to you face to face, not through envoys, not through documents, but through conviction." The line crackled faintly. Then, as if sensing the unspoken question forming in Traoré's mind, Putin added, "I will send for you. Not a standard flight, not a commercial jet. The aircraft I'm dispatching was designed during the peak of the Cold War, rebuilt for a new age. It is stealth-equipped, electromagnetic resistant, and unseen by NATO radar." Traoré's brow furrowed. A private aircraft off the books. A meeting without intermediaries. The gesture was bold. Too bold for mere diplomacy. It meant urgency. It meant danger. And above all, it meant trust. Or manipulation. Still, he said only 4 words. "I am listening, President." Putin didn't hesitate. This is bigger than alliances, bigger than Africa or Europe. There are forces moving behind the curtains of global power forces your enemies understand. You deserve to know what they know, and to protect what they seek to take from you. That struck a chord. Traoré's mind moved fast, cross-referencing intelligence briefings. remembering intercepted communications, strange activity in certain regions of West Africa. Something had been building. He had sensed it, but never had it been named. Putin's final words came in low, deliberate tones. The aircraft will arrive tonight. Discreet. Precise. You'll know it when you see it. Come as a leader, but also come as a seeker of truth. Then the line went silent. Traoré remained still for a long moment, the phone receiver in his hand. Outside, the sun continued to rise, but the light felt colder now, like something had shifted. He placed the phone down gently and returned to the balcony. Ouagadougou was waking up. Children headed to school. Street vendors unwrapped their morning wares. Soldiers rotated shifts. But inside the mind of its captain, a new chapter had already opened. And far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the skies were preparing to carry him not just to Moscow but into a world where truth, power, and myth converged. Night fell over Ouagadougou like a curtain of velvet. The skies were unusually still. No wind, no birds, as if the very air was holding its breath. At the military airstrip on the outskirts of the city, the ground crews had been quietly cleared out hours earlier. Only a handful of elite personnel remained stationed with no explanation. Only orders. Secure the runway. No questions asked. Then it appeared. No roar, no flashing lights. Just movement silent, smooth, unnerving. A shape descended from the darkness, blacker than the night itself. It didn't glide like a plane. It didn't hum like a drone. It hovered like a shadow, with purpose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of the tarmac, flanked by two aides. His eyes didn't blink as the aircraft landed. It was unlike anything here anyone had ever seen. Matte black, with a surface that seemed to absorb light. There were no windows, no insignias, no serial numbers. Just a single symbol etched faintly near the nose of the craft, a falcon with wings outstretched, its eyes glowing red, wrapped in a circle of ancient Slavic runes. The door didn't open with a hiss. It opened with a hum deep, low, and strangely resonant, like a voice without words. A narrow ramp extended. No crew stepped out. No welcome was spoken. Traoré stepped forward. His boots struck the metal surface of the ramp with a deliberate rhythm. As he entered the craft, a cool wave of air swept over him, not mechanical, but almost organic. Inside was a command center, cloaked in darkness. The walls pulsed faintly. Holographic projections floated mid-air weather systems, satellite paths, encrypted communications, and in the center of the cabin, secured in a transparent case, a black orb, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. One of Traoré's aides murmured, "This isn't just a plane, it's alive." He wasn't wrong. As Traoré sat, the cabin responded, adjusting temperature, dimming lights, syncing its rhythm to his presence. There were no windows, only digital projections offering a 360-degree view of the outside world in real-time infrared, sonar, electromagnetic overlays. This wasn't transport. It was surveillance. It was protection. It was something more. As the aircraft sealed and began its ascent, there were no flames, no engine roar, only a soft vibration in the bones. And as it lifted into the night sky, Captain Traoré understood. This journey was not simply a flight to Moscow. It was a passage into something far deeper, something that did not belong entirely to this world. As the aircraft ascended into the night, the world below faded into a distant memory. No blinking city lights, no radar signals, just darkness vast, quiet, and uncharted. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat still, eyes locked on the floating holographic map in front of him. It showed nothing familiar. The aircraft wasn't following normal flight paths. It was gliding into zones marked in red, sectors restricted even to military craft, zones no one entered without consequences. Storm clouds loomed ahead, not ordinary clouds but spirals of thunder and static, alive with unnatural force. Yet the aircraft never wavered. It moved through them like a ghost, untouched, undetected. Then it happened. A low vibration echoed through the cabin. Not from engines, but from somewhere deeper from the walls themselves. The lights dimmed. The air thickened. The orb at the center of the room began to glow brighter, pulsing in sync with something unseen. And then a voice, not over the intercom, not from the crew, but inside Traoré's mind. "You are not flying through air, Captain. You are crossing thresholds." The words were clear, deliberate, ancient. They didn't belong to man or machine. They felt elemental. Traoré didn't speak. He only glanced toward his aides. One of them looked pale, clutching a frozen watch that had mysteriously stopped ticking. Something had changed. The aircraft wasn't just flying, it was transitioning. Between dimensions? Between states of time? No one knew. Outside the craft, lightning danced across the clouds, but it never touched the fuselage. It curved around it as if the storm itself refused to challenge whatever this vessel had become. Inside, the orb throbbed, responding, anticipating. Traoré placed his hand near it. Not on it, just close enough to feel its warmth. And in that moment, a wave of understanding washed over him. This mission wasn't just about Moscow. It wasn't even about alliances. It was about revelation. He wasn't flying through sky. He was flying through mystery. Through something that had been waiting not for a nation, but for him. The dark skies of Eastern Europe began to soften as dawn approached. Moscow, ancient, resilient, and powerful, shimmered below, its golden domes catching the first rays of light. But this was no ordinary sunrise. The silent aircraft descended with eerie grace, guided by invisible vectors. No air traffic control, no beacon lights. It was as if the city itself knew and had cleared the skies in anticipation. On the private Kremlin airfield, a procession had gathered. Rows of elite Russian soldiers stood at perfect attention, their uniforms crisp, their breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. Behind them, a silent crowd had gathered: journalists, diplomats, African students, and ordinary citizens. They didn't cheer, they didn't speak. They watched, because they knew something unusual was about to happen. The aircraft landed without sound. And then, it opened. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped out onto the tarmac. His coat swayed in the breeze. His expression was calm, but his eyes held the sharpness of a man who had seen beyond the veil. At the far end of the red carpet stood President Vladimir Putin, surrounded by advisors and security. He stepped forward slowly, then offered a handshake. "Welcome to Moscow, Captain. Your presence honors us." Traoré returned the gesture with firm dignity. "Thank you, Mr. President. I come in peace and with purpose." No applause followed, no speeches, only a shared silence. Because what was happening here was not for cameras or headlines. It was the meeting of two men leaders, not just of nations, but of ideals forged under pressure. Two paths crossing at a moment in history few would understand, but many would feel. They entered a waiting convoy of armored vehicles. As they drove through the quiet streets of Moscow, citizens lined the sidewalks. Some waved. Others simply watched, as if sensing that something greater than protocol was in motion. Inside the vehicle, Traoré remained silent, because deep in his chest, beneath layers of logic and duty, he knew this visit would change everything. Not just for Burkina Faso, not just for Russia, but for the world. Behind the tall walls of the Kremlin, far from cameras and conference rooms, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was led into a private chamber, ancient, quiet, untouched by modern politics. The air was heavy, not from dust, but from history. This wasn't where treaties were signed or photos were staged. This room was meant for something else, something deeper. President Vladimir Putin stood by a long cedar table, carved generations ago by Russian craftsmen. On the table lay several encrypted tablets, military folders, and maps laced with red lines, routes, surveillance zones, patterns of movement across Africa. But that wasn't what caught Traoré's eye. It was the object at the center of the table. A metallic case, sealed tight, covered in symbols he didn't recognize. Putin approached it and pressed his palm against a hidden sensor. The case clicked softly, then opened. Inside was an orb. Black, silent, glowing. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Not artificial, not mechanical. Alive. This, Putin said, is Lacroix. We call it Earth Blood. He didn't smile. He didn't dramatize. He simply told the truth. It was discovered beneath the Ural Mountains after the Cold War. We don't fully understand its origins, but we know what it can do. He paused, watching Traoré's face. It can disrupt frequency weapons, shut down drone networks, create atmospheric interference, and sometimes it reacts. To what? Traoré asked. To fear, to strength, to intent. The orb pulsed brighter as the words were spoken, as if listening, responding. We believe, Putin continued, that it carries a kind of intelligence, dormant but aware. Some think it's a remnant of ancient technology, others, that it's something older than humanity itself. Traoré said nothing, but he could feel it. The orb didn't just emit energy. It projected presence, like it knew him. Putin's voice softened. I'm not offering you a weapon, Captain. I'm offering you something more dangerous, trust. I want you to take this with you, but know this. Once you touch it, it will mark you. Traoré stepped closer. The orb's glow grew warmer. He didn't reach for it. He didn't need to, because deep inside, he already felt it. The connection, the weight, the choice. And he understood. This wasn't a tool for war. It was a test. And history was watching. Putin didn't take Traoré to a briefing room. He led him deeper into the Kremlin through a corridor dimly lit by amber sconces, past guards who didn't speak, and into a place very few had ever seen. The Kremlin Chapel. A private sanctuary, older than the palace itself. Stone walls held centuries of silence. Candlelight flickered against ancient icons, and in the center stood a simple altar bare, except for two objects. A ceremonial Russian sword, its blade etched with Slavic runes, and an ebony staff shaped like the Sankofa bird of Burkina Faso, its neck arched backward, a symbol of remembering the past to guide the future. Putin turned to Traoré. Words can be forged, documents can be burned, but vows, when spoken before symbols, become something else. He gestured to the sword. This blade was once held by the Tsar's bodyguard. It protected emperors until the empire fell. Now it protects only truth. Then to the staff. And this, we had flown in from your homeland. Quietly. Your people call it sacred. We do too. Captain Traoré stepped forward, the echoes of his boots like drums in the hush. In Burkina Faso, oaths were made beneath baobab trees, with hands pressed into the soil. But here, it would be done with fire and relics. I swear, Traoré began, his voice low but unwavering. Not on paper, but on the spirit of those who came before me. On the warriors of the Mossi. On the wind that carried our struggle. Putin followed, with a vow in Old Russian, almost whispered, but no less powerful. Then something neither man had planned happened. They exchanged symbols. Traoré took the Russian sword. Putin accepted the African staff. It wasn't political. It wasn't strategic. It was spiritual. And in that moment, in that chapel where candles had burned through revolutions and wars, a new kind of alliance was born. One not written into law, but etched into memory. As they stood in silence, the orb safely stored in its case back in the chamber pulsed once more in the distance, as if it had felt the vow, as if it had approved. The flight home began like any other. Captain Ibrahim Traoré boarded the same silent aircraft, the orb now secured inside a black case at his side. The Kremlin guards saluted. The sky was calm, The night seemed ordinary. But it wasn't. As soon as the aircraft cleared Moscow airspace, the world began to change. The stars above twisted slightly, as if viewed through rippling water. The clouds gathered unnaturally fast, dark, heavy, spinning into a vortex that had no center, only pull. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flickered. Then, silence. Total silence. The engines dimmed. The lights inside the cabin pulsed, then faded to black. The aircraft stopped flying. It floated, suspended between altitude and something else. Traoré felt it before he saw it. A presence. Not outside the aircraft, but around it. Through it. Then, through the veil of lightning and cloud, a shape appeared. A figure. Massive. Humanoid. But not human. It was made of light and shadow, shifting constantly, with no defined face, only presence. And then came the voice. Not over radio. Not in the air. But directly in his mind. You are marked. You have crossed the threshold. The orb in the black case began to glow violently, pulsing in rhythm with the figure's presence. Traoré could feel it humming beneath his feet, inside his chest. The figure raised a hand not to strike, but to show. And suddenly, Traoré saw visions. Cities crumbling in silence, leaders consumed by fear, and a future not yet written, one that depended on choices he had not yet made. Then the voice returned. You seek truth, but truth has a cost. The orb is not a gift, it is a test. You are the bridge between what was and what will be. The storm outside cracked with light, illuminating the cabin in a blinding glow, and in an instant everything returned. The engines roared back to life. The lights steadied. The aircraft resumed its path as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Traoré sat motionless, breath heavy, eyes locked on the orb, no dim once more, but pulsing faintly, like it had heard something he hadn't. He didn't speak. No one did. Because everyone aboard understood. They had not just flown across continents. They had crossed into the unknown. And something ancient had crossed with them. The aircraft touched down just before sunrise. Ouagadougou was quiet. The skies were clear. But to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, everything felt heavier. As the engines powered down and the ramp lowered, a breeze moved through the cabin, warm, familiar, grounding. But it couldn't shake what still lingered inside him. He stepped onto the tarmac, boots echoing softly in the early morning silence. Waiting at the base of the runway was a modest welcoming committee. A few senior officers, a handful of aides, and at a distance, his wife, Ajaratu. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply watched. She could feel it. Something had changed. Traoré's eyes met hers. In that brief glance, there were no words but 1,000 questions passed between them. He walked toward her, slower than usual, the black case with the orb clutched firmly in one hand. You're not the same, she said softly as he reached her. He nodded. I'm not. What happened up there? Traoré looked up at the sky. The same sky he had flown through, now calm, now blue. But it wasn't just sky anymore. Not to him. I don't have the words, he answered. But we've been marked. All of us. Something greater has begun. They stood there in silence. Around them, the city was waking up. Birds began to sing. Engines sputtered in the distance. Life resumed. But for Traoré, reality hadn't resumed, it had shifted. The orb at his side pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder that whatever had awakened on that journey was still with him, watching, waiting. He took Ajaratu's hand. We have to prepare, he said quietly. Not just for politics, not for enemies we can see. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. For what then? For what's coming next? Inside the presidential palace, the walls stood as they always had, lined with framed maps, dusty books, and reminders of battles past. But today, they bore witness to something new. Captain Ibrahim Traoré entered the secured briefing room in silence. Around the table sat his most trusted advisors, men and women who had guided him through military operations, economic reforms, and diplomatic tensions. But nothing in their training had prepared them for what he was about to say. He placed the black case on the table and opened it slowly. The orb pulsed softly. Its glow filled the room, not bright, but steady, not demanding attention, but commanding presence. "This," Traoré said, "is not just an object. It is a signal, a warning, a key." The room fell quiet. "This was given to me in Moscow, but it doesn't belong to Russia. It doesn't belong to any country. It belongs to something older than nations, older than power as we understand it." One of his advisors leaned forward, hesitant. "What does it do?" Traoré looked at him, not with certainty, but with gravity. "It shows you what's coming." He paused. "And if we ignore it, we won't survive what comes next." They didn't ask for proof. The orb was proof. The weight in Traoré's voice was proof. The silence in the room, the kind that follows a truth too big to fully grasp, was proof. One of his generals finally whispered, "Is this supernatural?" Traoré shook his head. "Number, it's reality, just a deeper layer of it, one we were never supposed to see." He closed the case. "For years, we've fought battles on the surface. Borders, budgets, bulletins." He looked each of them in the eye. "Now we fight for something else. For balance, for truth, for the right to exist freely in a world that is not as simple as we thought." The advisors sat in stunned silence. No one dared to respond. Because they knew this was not the end of a mission. It was the beginning of a new era. And their leader had returned not just with a gift, but with a message. One that history would not write in ink, but in consequence.